Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene. My name is Jennifer Hackett. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm delighted to be the ministerial intern of this church. With me today are our music director, Mitch Davey, our worship associate, Linda Konecki, our pianist, Suzanne Giordano, and behind the scenes working tech is member Kat Johnson. Welcome especially to any visitors we have among us today. If you want to know more about this great church or to contact any of our staff, please visit our website at uueugene.org.
In preparing to light our chalice, I'll give you a moment to gather yours or to use your hands. We light this flame and we remember its origins, a symbol of love, lighting the way for those trying to escape oppression and find their way to freedom.
Where's the love? It can feel hard to see it, especially if you've grown up Black, Indigenous, or a person of color in America. Let us do our work today together, for together we are stronger. And let us do our work today and show how strong we can become. Join me now in grounding ourselves. Close your eyes if that's comfortable. Give space to yourself to just breathe for the next minute. To allow time for the meaning of this service, of this faith, of what we are called to do, to sink in. We are called to live into our love. We are called to enact our love within our own community and within the wider world. Take a moment to send that love to those hurting, those oppressed, those among us, those across the country. Those who loved Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and all of those names whose stories we don't know. Those who need us to be a voice alongside of them, sending them love. Sending yourself love, for we must be grounded in our ideals, principles, and values in order to be the movement that we are called to be. Breathe in, breathe out. May it be so.
Permission to use the book, The Big Umbrella, for this service was obtained from the author by email on September 9th, 2020. Thank you to Amy Jean Bates for her good message, beautiful illustrations, and generous heart. The story for today will be The Big Umbrella by Amy Jean Bates and co-written with Juniper Bates. I also have someone to co-tell the story with me. This is Emerson.
Hello.
The Big Umbrella.
By the front door, there's an umbrella. It is big. It is a big, friendly umbrella. It likes to help. It likes to spread its arms wide. It loves to give shelter. It loves to gather people in. It doesn't matter if you are tall or hairy or plaid. It doesn't matter how many legs you have. Some people worry that there won't be enough room under the big umbrella. But the amazing thing is, there is. There is always room.
There is always room.
We all have moments in our lives that we want to share with our community, our ups and our downs, our lives and our loves. Please join us in the chat with your joys and sorrows that you wish to share with the community at this time. Thank you all for sharing, for clean air, for getting to know each other, for the joy of children and the joy of being spared. We are thankful for illnesses and death, and fire loss and pain and aloneness. And especially, we remember the death this week of UUA moderator, 41-year-old Elandria Williams. They gave their life in service to Unitarian Universalism and have been pulled away from us too soon. For all of these things, we hold you. You are not alone in your sorrow. For all of these things, and all of the things in your hearts, as well as what's been named aloud by our beloveds today, we hold you, we pray with you, we breathe with you, we work to enact change with and for you. Where's the love, they ask? Here's the love, right here with us. I'm so glad to be with you today at the front end of this church year together, our new year, if you will. I'm honored to be your ministerial intern and delighted to be meeting you and entering into this sacred space that we are creating here together today. I've been with you about a month now and have met so many of you in so many kinds of meetings and worship settings, various environmental emergencies that have affected your homes, livelihoods, and health. I'm glad to be coming around to give my first in-depth messages to you here via this virtual pulpit. It's also a little strange to be doing an introductory sermon after we've been through so many things together during these most unusual times. And yet I shall sally forth. Some of you already know a little bit about me, that I did things in an odd order, if there's such a thing, on a journey to becoming a UU. I went to seminary full of hope and belief that the faith tradition that had raised me would welcome me into the ministerial circle, even though the leadership of men comprising that circle continued to close ranks and keep the circle tight. They were not then and are still not now open to women entering the circle of ordained leadership there. That was a hierarchical structure that had power from the top down, so decisions made on high affected all of the people, all the way down to the churches and the people who comprised them. I went to women's ordination conferences that ultimately yielded nothing, no change. Add in a bit of an existing struggle with some of the theology that only continued to grow as I continued my studies, and I felt a bit lost. All of this calling and nowhere to be with it. I thought I'd have to start making up my own religion. As a very well-informed parent doing religious education without the benefit of community, I was shockingly lazy. My well-intended plans to do home church really never got too far off the ground. Maybe you also found Unitarian Universalism due to half-baked and poorly executed breakfast table lesson plans. Thank goodness for the internet. I saved myself a lot of constructive theological time. Do you know that if you type in the phrase liberal religion, not necessarily with Jesus, that the first thing that comes up is Unitarianism? It is true. It's safe to try this one at home. Just do it later because I have some important things that I want to talk with you about today. Now, I'm not sure who all is with us today. And as an extension of welcome to all of our newcomers and our visitors, I hope the regulars will lend me some patience as I say all of our abbreviations the long way around the first time. So we are, thank goodness, a liberal religious faith movement. We're very clear about that. There's no pussyfooting around when it comes to us declaring boldly and clearly our values, as outlined in the 7 principles that guide us. And in our eggy sort of way, within the 7 principles, we don't even dangle our prepositions, of which I approve. If you're not yet familiar with our 7 principles, they have a long and storied history, and sometimes a hearse story. Our nationwide magazine, UU World, has a great article from the early 2000s about the backstory of our principles. It's kind of a long story, so I'll sum up. Many UUs love Robert's Rules of Order, and we have a great deal of polity-wonks here among us. These are the people who enjoy a good 3 to 18-year debate over the placement of commas. I'm mostly kidding, but not entirely. And we enjoy doing things by consensus, which does take longer than being told how to do something. And so when the Unitarians and the Universalists, who used to be separate entities, started to get serious about merging in the early 1960s, they were able to agree on a precursor to our current principles. So they look kind of like they do today, but not as good or as relevant to the current times. And then UU women came along in the 70s, and they asked for the circle to get a little wider, to allow the principles to shift to have more gender inclusive language. And just about every time people outside any circle ask, can you widen that circle a little? I can just squeeze in if you'll just step back and make a little more room. We can get a little squirrely. And we look to our lengthy processes to look at the circle from all the angles until we feel more comfortable. The thing is, for liberal religion, we have a long history of tightening up when people ask us to make a little more room. Maybe sometimes we're afraid that the circle will start to take on angles that don't look like circles we know anymore. Maybe sometimes we fear it will break if we step back and open it too wide. Unfortunately, that leaves people asking to come in feeling sort of unwelcome, out there alone outside the circle while we have our debates and feel more comfortable eventually. If we have a little faith in our faith that our circles are true to their nature, infinite in their capacity to still be a circle regardless of size, then we can watch them stretch and get infinitely bigger, more like what our values state explicitly. I posit to you that this stretching makes us infinitely better. Many of you know that this church belongs to the Unitarian Universalist Association, or the UUA, which is not our governing body, but our guide, a group to whom we and several 100,000 of our closest UU church friends belong. Sort of like belonging to the Moose Lodge, but without the funny hats and the handshakes. In 2017, the non-hiring of a qualified person of color to a leadership role in the UUA set off a good series of events. The leader at that time resigned, and a leadership team that better represented all of those in the circle emerged, and a task force was formed. We love a good task force. The task force has been hard at work behind the scenes, analyzing, watching, listening, observing, and collecting stories from UUs across the country, from all of our circles, for almost 3 years. And earlier this year, they published their findings. You can find their report at the UUA website. We'll provide you with the link in the chat at the end of this service. Guess what it's called? The report is called Widening the Circle of Concern. I strongly encourage you to read it later. Perhaps take it in chunks. It is the foundational work of Unitarian Universalism in the immediate future. I'll sum this up for you too. As people, we generally really value ongoing education, which is good because we have some work to do with living out our collective values as best we can. And they provide us with some potential solutions. So, as you can imagine, at this year's annual meeting of the UUA called General Assembly, or GA, we heard a lot about how we can widen the circle within our own faith as well as the world around us. Many of you know I am a member of a UU church in Nashville, Tennessee. I attended GA this year as a delegate, or a person who is nominated by the congregation to not just attend, but to also vote on behalf of our congregation. This is how we do things. This is what democracy looks like. You may have forgotten, for having seen it so little enacted across our country lately, what democracy looks like. I attended a Widening the Circle of Concern session at GA this June about reparations. Reparation is often a scary word for a white person, but I soldiered on. In the session, I learned that in best case scenarios, the dominant culture with the lion's share of privilege is not the decider of fixing the problems. The offending group of people is and should be the decider of how and when the problems feel fixed. When an equal share of power has been deliberately or unintentionally withheld from any group of people, that group of people deserves empowerment to tell the dominant group what they need in order to make it right. When our children are small and they injure one another by accident or on purpose, we tell them to say, "I'm sorry. How can I help?" The injured party gets to decide how the help should arrive. This is also a foundational principle in restorative justice. Reparation comes through phrases in my house such as, "Don't do that again," or "I need a hug," or, as happens so frequently in my home, "Can I have $1?" We learn this reparation technique from Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is the next generation iteration from Mr. Rogers' puppet, Daniel Tiger, still teaching his good values after all these years. In any event, when I'd been to GA 2 years prior, I'd heard about a proposal that was and wasn't working its way through our UU channels of democracy across the country. It's called the 8th Principle, a new one to add on to the existing 7 principles that guide our actions. Let me read it to you. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Good, right? And when I first heard of it 2 years ago, I thought it sounded great. And I heard the reasons why it wasn't being fast-tracked for the adoption by everyone in the UUA immediately. And they went like this. Well, it seems like the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and 7th principles all have some elements of this one in it. And also, our UUA bylaws are reviewed routinely, and they're soon going to start a multi-year process of reviewing Article 2 of the bylaws, which encompasses the principles. So it doesn't really seem like the best time to go changing the existing principles when we're just going to be reviewing them anyway. And finally, the most cringeworthy one. We don't like the words. We think we should spend more time rewriting them. You should know that the words were carefully chosen by a group of people of color with a lot of buy-in. It's one reparation, or repairing, of relationship to respect the words as they've been written. They chose the words that they most needed to help them feel welcomed in our circles, in their circles. It's a white supremacy culture thing to desire control over that too. And 2 years ago, when I first heard of this 8th principle, I, and apparently thousands of others, thought, okay, I hope that passes. And that was that. I forgot about it, which I can do because it doesn't affect me directly because of my privilege. But it does affect me because it affects the people that I want to feel welcome here. I want to invite us to think more deeply about why it might not be okay to forget about it and wait while these things are being debated and reviewed and voted on as a nationwide body of UUs, which could take another 3 to 18 years. In 1648, our forebears in faith in New England got together and hammered out what is referred to today as the Cambridge Platform of 1648. It has a hilariously long real title. Get ready. The Cambridge Platform of Church Discipline gathered out of the Word of God and agreed upon by the elders and messengers of the churches assembled in Synod in 1648. But we just refer to it as the Cambridge Platform, probably because of that run-on sentence. The platform outlines that we are Congregationalists. In other words, we make our decisions as individual churches. Our structure is the opposite of top-down power. Our power lies with us, right here in this group of people assembled, and the leadership that we elect to this church. We have guidance from the UUA, but we, the leadership and fellow congregants of the UU Church in Eugene, can and do adopt principles when we feel it's appropriate and for the good of the whole. Unfortunately, the work underlying the 8th principle the work of dismantling white supremacy culture in our country and in our churches is going to be significant. And we'll need each other for reminders and accountability to the work that we've already begun. This week alone, in Louisville at 9 p.m. local time on Wednesday night, anguished protesters found themselves pitted against the police and a city curfew and had nowhere safe to go. Our UU ministers in Louisville responded to a clergy all call to head downtown. Seeing the situation, they opened the UU church downtown for the first time since March and let all of the people in, giving shape and definition and action to the word sanctuary. As I sat on my front patio last Saturday, ironically participating in a nationwide UU Allies for Racial Justice caucus online, a pickup truck drove by and saw the only sign that's in front of my house, my Black Lives Matter sign, and shouted, "Trump hater!" My own personal struggle regarding emotions over our current elected leader aside, I was entirely beside the point of the sign. Aside from my sadness, my next feeling was fear for my family. What if they came back? What if they got aggressive? I immediately contemplated taking the sign down. Fortunately, I was with people via Zoom at that very moment who helped me to stay accountable. How am I supposed to be a good ally if I crumple at the first feeling of fear? My Black, Indigenous, and people of color siblings of faith don't get to escape unwanted and unwarranted persecution by just taking down a sign. At General Assembly this summer, my delegation from my church established an email text chain to communicate while we were all on our computers for this first ever all virtual GA. So there we all were, chugging along with our learning and our voting and our texting, when we got a group text from one in our delegation. He identifies as a person of color and a UU, and he gave me permission to share this text with you. From Roddy Biggs. So I just want to say that in a chat that I'm in, POC, people, including myself, are pretty outraged at the fact that the UUA and UU places of worship are wanting or saying that they need to study racism in villages more before being able to vote on affirmation of the 8th principle. It has been asked now over and over how many more Black, POC, and queer lives must be taken before our faith and our congregations take action. Many feel that if we wait, it will be too late. Roddy's words hit me like a ton of bricks. Too late, or they'll leave us? Too late, or they'll be dead? Either way, not good. Someone that I know, a person about whom I personally care what happens to them, shook me out of my complacency. I didn't know that he needed my help. And again, it was my privilege sneaking out again, not to know. But now I do know, and I can't unknow it, and I don't want to unknow it. What a rare gift that was for me, a mostly European American descendant, to have access directly to what people who feel outside of the circle need and want. It's exhausting for my BIPOC siblings to have to expend the emotional energy to ask us what they need over and over again. And it's so easy to offer a place in the circle. Read these words of the 8th principle and agree to them as a starting place. And this will keep our siblings of color from wanting to leave our circle. This will help them to feel safe. This will help them to feel heard. Can it be this easy? Yes and no. It's only easy if we back up the adopted words with educating ourselves constantly about how to be in right relationship, how to keep the circles ever widening, how to address the needs, how to listen to those needs. But it is easy as a congregational church to adopt the principle. And it is a significantly appreciated gesture from the people of color who wrote it and will be most affected by its adoption. The work is living into it. Please know that you are invited to continue the conversation about widening the circle and living into the principles of our faith of this church. The circle of Unitarian Universalism won't break. There's room enough here for everyone. Let us live into the eighth principle now when our country and our church need it more than ever. May it be so. The work of the eighth principle is for all of us. Join us as we live into journeying towards spiritual wholeness by building a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and the other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. May it be so.